At 28, she possessed a natural elegance that no amount of money could buy. Her dark skin glowed against the emerald silk blouse she wore, her hair swept up in a style that revealed the graceful curve of her neck. When she smiled, which she did often, dimples appeared that Maxwell had memorized during countless board meetings. "Your usual," she said, setting the coffee down with hands that never trembled, unlike his own when she was near. "Extra shot, no sugar. Though I still think you're going to give yourself a heart attack with all that caffeine." Maxwell forced himself to look at the quarterly reports spread across his desk instead of the way her full lips curved when she teased him. "My heart survived worse things than coffee, Ms. Brooks." Like falling in love with someone I can never have, he thought, but said nothing. Jasmine lingered, straightening papers that didn't need straightening. This was their dance, finding excuses to stretch these moments longer than professionalism required. "The Morrison contract needs your signature, and you have the Parker Industries meeting at 4. I've already sent the preliminary numbers to your tablet." "You think of everything." The words came out softer than he intended, loaded with meanings he couldn't voice. Their eyes met for a heartbeat too long. Maxwell saw something flicker in her warm brown gaze, something that made his pulse race and his palms sweat like a teenager. But then she looked away, professional mask sliding back into place. "Will you be staying late again tonight?" she asked, already knowing the answer. Maxwell Sterling always stayed late. It was easier than going home to his empty penthouse, easier than admitting he stayed hoping she might stay too. "Probably. You should leave at 5 though. No need for both of us to waste our evening here." Jasmine's laugh was music he'd never tire of hearing. "Who says I'd be wasting it? Sometimes the best conversations happen after hours." The comment hung between them, pregnant with possibility, before she seemed to catch herself. "I mean, the building gets so quiet. Peaceful for working." Maxwell nodded, throat tight. "Right. Working." She was almost to the door when she turned back. Maxwell? His name, on her lips, was a prayer he wasn't worthy of. "Yes?" "Take care of yourself. You work too hard." The concern in her voice nearly undid him. "I will." After she left, Maxwell sank into his leather chair, head in his hands. 3 years. 3 years of stolen glances, of conversations that danced around feelings neither dared name, of lying awake wondering what it would feel like to hold her, to tell her that she was the first thing he thought about when he woke and the last thing on his mind before sleep. "What are you thinking about right now, Jasmine? Do you ever wonder what we could be if I had the courage to cross that line?" 10 blocks away in her modest Brooklyn apartment, Jasmine Brooks stood before her bedroom mirror, applying lipstick with hands that trembled slightly. The burgundy dress hugged her curves perfectly. She'd bought it months ago but never had the courage to wear it. Tonight felt different. Tonight, she was determined to move forward. Her phone buzzed with a text from her date. "Can't wait to see you. Tavern on the Green at 7. You're going to love this place. Marcus Chin." No, that name was forbidden. Marcus Wright seemed nice enough. A lawyer, successful, attractive. He'd asked her out after they met at her friend Andrea's birthday party last month. Everything about him should have been perfect. So why did her heart feel empty? Jasmine caught her reflection's eye in the mirror. "Stop it," she whispered to herself. "Stop thinking about him. Maxwell Sterling is your boss. He's a billionaire. He's everything I've ever wanted but can't have." She thought about their moment that morning, the way his eyes had softened when he looked at her, the electricity that sparked when their fingers accidentally touched as she handed him the contract. For just a second, she'd seen something in his expression that made her believe. No. She grabbed her purse, keys jingling. "He's being kind. Professional. You're reading too much into it because you want something that will never happen." The October air was crisp as she emerged from the subway at Columbus Circle. Central Park's trees blazed with autumn colors, couples walked hand in hand along the paths. And for a moment, Jasmine allowed herself to imagine walking there with Maxwell. What would it feel like to have his strong hand in hers? To see those guarded eyes soften completely. Just for her? Her phone rang. Andrea's contact photo lighting up the screen. Please tell me you're not having second thoughts. Andrea's voice was stern but affectionate. I'm walking to the restaurant now, Jasmine said, though her feet had slowed considerably. Good. Because you've been pining over Mr. Untouchable for 3 years, and it's time to move on. Marcus is a catch. I know he is. But Jasmine stopped walking. Around her, the city pulsed with evening energy. Taxis honking, people laughing, life moving forward while she felt stuck in the same impossible loop. There's no but. You're right. Maxwell and we work together. He's my boss. He's never given me any indication that he sees me as anything more than his assistant. Exactly. So go enjoy dinner with a man who actually asked you out. 20 minutes later, Jasmine sat across from Marcus Wright at a candlelit table, trying to focus on his stories about law school while her mind wandered to Maxwell. Was he still at the office? Had he eaten dinner? Did he ever think about her the way she thought about him? You seem distracted, Marcus said gently. Everything okay? Jasmine forced a smile. Sorry. Long day at work. Demanding boss? You have no idea. Something like that. Marcus reached across the table, covering her hand with his. His touch was warm, pleasant, but it didn't send electricity shooting up her arm the way Maxwell's accidental touches did. Well, you're here now. With me. And I have to say, you look absolutely stunning tonight. He was trying so hard to be charming, and he was succeeding. Jasmine found herself laughing at his jokes, sharing stories from her childhood in Atlanta, allowing herself to be present in the moment instead of lost in impossible fantasies. By the time they left the restaurant, she was genuinely enjoying herself. Maybe Andrea was right. Maybe it was time to stop waiting for something that would never happen. Thank you for dinner, she said as they stood outside Tavern on the Green, the autumn breeze rustling the leaves above them. I had a wonderful time. So did I. Marcus stepped closer, his intention clear. I'd really like to see you again, Jasmine. She looked up at him, really looked. He was handsome, successful, available. He was here, present, interested in her. Not hiding behind professional boundaries or class differences or whatever excuses she'd been making for Maxwell's silence. I'd like that too, she heard herself say. When Marcus leaned down to kiss her, Jasmine closed her eyes and tried to feel something, anything, beyond simple affection. The kiss was nice, gentle, promising. Everything a first kiss should be. So why do I feel like I'm betraying my own heart? She was so lost in trying to manufacture feelings that she didn't notice the black Tesla pulling up to the curb, or the man inside whose world was shattering as he watched the woman he loved kiss someone else. Maxwell had left the office with every intention of going home. The Parker Industries deal was signed, the quarterly projections looked promising, and for once, he decided to take Jasmine's advice about not working himself to death. He'd even told his driver to take the scenic route through Central Park, a rare indulgence that reminded him there was a world beyond profit margins and board meetings. That decision would haunt him for the rest of his life. The Tesla glided silently down Central Park West when Maxwell saw her. Even from a distance, even in the gathering dusk, he would recognize that silhouette anywhere. Jasmine stood outside Tavern on the Green, her burgundy dress catching the golden light spilling from the restaurant's windows. She looked radiant, more beautiful than he'd ever seen her, and for a split second, his heart soared with the simple joy of seeing her happy. Then he saw the man. Tall, well-dressed, confident in the way that came from never doubting you belonged wherever you were. The stranger stood close to Jasmine, too close, his hand resting possessively on her lower back as he leaned down to whisper something in her ear that made her laugh. "Stop the car," Maxwell commanded, his voice rough with an emotion he couldn't name. "Sir," his driver Thomas glanced back through the rearview mirror. "Just pull over for a moment." Maxwell's hands gripped the leather seat as he watched the scene unfold like a car accident in slow motion. The man was saying something that made Jasmine's eyes light up, her face tilting toward his with an expression Maxwell had seen directed at him countless times during their late-night work sessions. But this was different. This was intimate, personal, real. She's on a date. The realization hit him like a physical blow. All this time, while he'd been drowning in his feelings for her, building castles in the air from stolen glances and lingering conversations, she'd been living her life. Dating. Looking for love with someone who had the courage to actually ask her out. Someone who isn't you, you coward. The man stepped closer, and Maxwell's breath caught in his throat. He could see it coming, the way the stranger's head tilted, the way Jasmine's eyes fluttered closed, the way she didn't pull away but instead seemed to melt into the moment. The kiss lasted exactly 7 seconds. Maxwell counted every one, his heart dying a little more with each passing beat. He watched the woman he loved. Yes, loved. There was no point in denying it now. Give herself to someone else with a tenderness that should have been his. Jasmine's arms came up to rest against the man's chest, her fingers curling into his jacket. The gesture was so natural, so right, that Maxwell felt something fundamental break inside him. She wasn't just kissing this man. She was choosing him. Choosing a future that didn't include Maxwell Sterling. "Sir, are you all right?" Thomas's voice seemed to come from very far away. Maxwell couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The windows of the Tesla suddenly felt like they were closing in on him, the air thick and suffocating. All the oxygen in the world couldn't fill the hole that had just opened in his chest. When the kiss finally ended, Maxwell watched Jasmine's face transform. Her eyes remained closed for a moment longer, and when she opened them, there was something soft and wondering in her expression. The man said something that made her laugh, that musical sound Maxwell had thought belonged to him, and she nodded, her hand still resting on his chest. They were making plans. A second date. A future. "Drive," Maxwell whispered. "Sir." "Drive. Now." The Tesla pulled away from the curb, but Maxwell couldn't stop himself from turning back to look through the rear window. Jasmine and her date were walking toward the park entrance, his arm around her waist, her head tilted toward his as they talked. They looked perfect together. Natural. Like two pieces of the same puzzle fitting seamlessly into place. Everything Maxwell would never be for her. The ride back to his penthouse passed in a blur of city lights and traffic sounds that couldn't penetrate the roaring in his ears. Maxwell's mind raced through every interaction he'd had with Jasmine over the past 3 years, searching desperately for signs he'd missed, clues that she was involved with someone. Had she mentioned this man before? Had there been phone calls Maxwell hadn't noticed, texts that made her smile in ways he hadn't understood? How long had this been going on? How long had she been building a life with someone else while Maxwell lived in his fool's paradise of stolen moments and unspoken feelings? You never asked, his conscience whispered brutally. You never gave her any reason to think you were interested. You've been her boss, nothing more, and now you're shocked that she's moved on with her life? The elevator to his penthouse felt like a coffin. Maxwell's reflection in the polished steel doors showed a man he barely recognized. Hollow-eyed, pale, looking every one of his 42 years and then some. When had he become this pathetic creature, pining after a woman who clearly saw him as nothing more than a paycheck? His penthouse welcomed him with its usual cold perfection. Floor to ceiling. No, massive windows offered a view of the city that magazines called breathtaking. The minimalist furniture, the expensive art, the silence that money could buy. All of it felt like a mausoleum now. Maxwell poured himself 3 fingers of 30-year-old scotch and stood at the window, staring down at the city where Jasmine was probably having the most romantic evening of her life with a man who'd had the balls to actually pursue her. What did you think was going to happen? He asked his reflection. That she'd wait forever for you to grow a spine? That she'd somehow read your mind and realize you've been in love with her since the day she corrected your grammar in that board meeting and made you laugh for the first time in months? The scotch burned going down, but it was nothing compared to the fire eating him alive from the inside. Maxwell had built an empire from nothing, had stared down corporate sharks and government regulators without flinching, had made decisions worth billions of dollars without breaking a sweat. But he'd been too afraid to tell one woman how he felt about her. His phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. His other assistant, the one who handled his personal schedule. A reminder about tomorrow's charity gala, the one where he'd planned to ask Jasmine to accompany him. Not as a date, of course. Never as a date, but as his +1 for business networking purposes. Maxwell hurled the phone across the room, watching it shatter against the white wall. The sound was satisfying for exactly 3 seconds before the silence rushed back in, heavier than before. 3 years. 3 years of playing it safe, of maintaining professional boundaries, of convincing himself that his feelings were one-sided. 3 years of watching her light up rooms with her presence while he stood in the shadows, too afraid to step into the light with her. And now it was too late. The man she'd kissed had everything Maxwell didn't. The courage to take a chance, the wisdom to see what was right in front of him and act on it, the confidence to believe he was worthy of her affection. He was probably holding her hand right now, walking through Central Park, making her laugh, building memories that would last a lifetime. Maxwell finished his scotch and poured another, then another. The alcohol did nothing to numb the pain, but it made the edges softer, the regret less sharp. Somewhere in the amber depths of his glass, he saw the ghost of what could have been. Dinners by candlelight, lazy Sunday mornings, Jasmine's laugh echoing through these empty rooms, her presence making his house a home. By midnight, Maxwell was drunk on whiskey and self-loathing, staring at his phone's remains and wondering if this was what rock bottom felt like. Tomorrow, he would have to face her. Tomorrow, he would have to pretend he hadn't seen her kissing another man. Pretend his heart wasn't scattered in pieces across his living room floor. Pretend that everything was exactly the same as it had been this morning. But everything had changed. The illusion was shattered, the fantasy dead. Jasmine Brooks was never going to be his, and Maxwell Sterling was going to have to learn how to live with that truth. What he didn't know was that across town, Jasmine was lying awake in her own bed, wondering why the perfect kiss from a perfect man had felt like settling for something less than her heart truly wanted. The Sterling Technologies building felt different the next morning, as if the very air had shifted overnight. Jasmine noticed it the moment she stepped off the elevator onto the 42nd floor, a tension that hadn't been there yesterday, a coldness that seemed to emanate from Maxwell's corner office like Arctic wind. She'd barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Marcus's face as he kissed her, felt the guilt that had twisted in her stomach when all she could think about was how different it would feel if those lips belonged to Maxwell Sterling. The kiss had been perfectly pleasant. Marcus had been a perfect gentleman, and she'd felt perfectly empty afterward. What's wrong with me? She'd wondered as she tossed and turned until dawn. He's everything I should want. Now, standing outside Maxwell's office with his morning coffee. Extra shot, no sugar, just the way he liked it. Jasmine steeled herself for another day of pretending her heart didn't skip every time she saw him. She knocked twice, their usual signal, and entered without waiting for permission. It was their morning ritual, as natural as breathing. Except Maxwell didn't look up. He sat behind his desk, immaculate as always in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Jasmine made in 3 months. But something was wrong. His jaw was set in a hard line. His steel-gray eyes fixed on his computer screen with an intensity that felt forced. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his usually perfect hair looked like he'd run his hands through it repeatedly. "Your coffee," Jasmine said, setting the cup on his desk in their usual spot, careful not to disturb the papers he was pretending to read. Maxwell's eyes flicked up for exactly 1 second, long enough for Jasmine to see something raw and wounded in their depths before his professional mask slammed back into place. "Thank you, Ms. Brooks." Ms. Brooks. Not Jasmine, not the warm familiarity that had developed over 3 years of shared late nights and easy conversations. The formal address hit her like a slap. "I've rescheduled your 10 o'clock with the Peterson Group," she continued, fighting to keep her voice steady. "They requested Friday instead. And the final reports for the Morrison deal are ready for your review." "Fine." His fingers never stopped moving across the keyboard, dismissing her without a word. Jasmine stood there for a moment, confused and hurt by his sudden coldness. Yesterday morning, They'd shared coffee and easy banter. He'd looked at her with warmth in his eyes, had seemed genuinely concerned about her working too hard. Now he was treating her like a stranger. "Maxwell is everything. That will be all, Ms. Brooks." His voice was arctic, cutting through her words like a blade. "I have calls to make." The dismissal was so sharp, so final, that Jasmine actually took a step back. 3 years of carefully built intimacy crumbled in the space between his words, leaving her standing in the ruins of what she'd thought was a genuine connection. "Of course," she managed, her professional training kicking in even as her heart shattered. "I'll be at my desk if you need anything." Maxwell didn't respond. Didn't even look up as she left his office, closing the door with hands that trembled slightly. At her desk, positioned strategically where she could see his office through the glass walls, Jasmine tried to focus on her work. But every few minutes, her eyes drifted to Maxwell's figure hunched over his computer, and she felt the familiar ache in her chest intensify. What did I do wrong? She replayed their conversation from yesterday, searching for some misstep, some offense that could explain his sudden transformation. Had she been too familiar? Too presumptuous? Had she somehow crossed a line without realizing it? Or maybe he found out about your date, a treacherous voice whispered in her mind. Maybe he knows you went out with Marcus and he's disgusted that his assistant is dating around like some kind of... No. That was ridiculous. Maxwell Sterling didn't care about her personal life. He'd never shown any interest in her romantic relationships, had never asked if she was seeing anyone or indicated that it mattered to him one way or another. So why did his coldness feel like punishment? Because you've been living in a fantasy, she told herself brutally. You've been reading meaning into professional kindness and building castles in the air from stolen glances. He's your boss. You're his employee. That's all you've ever been. By noon, the tension had become unbearable. Maxwell had emerged from his office twice, once for a meeting with the board, once to speak with the legal department, and both times he'd walked past her desk without acknowledgement. No nod, no smile, not even eye contact. He treated her with less warmth than he showed the security guards. Jasmine's phone buzzed with a text from Andrea. How did last night go? Did Marcus sweep you off your feet? She stared at the message, remembering Marcus's gentle hands, his respectful kiss, the way he'd walked her to the subway entrance and promised to call. Everything about the evening had been perfect except for the hollowness in her chest, the feeling that she was betraying something precious by trying to move on. It was nice, she texted back. He's taking me to dinner Friday. The lie came easily. Marcus had mentioned wanting to see her again, but they hadn't made concrete plans. Still, Jasmine found herself committing to the fiction, as if saying it would make it true, would help her forget the way her heart broke a little more each time Maxwell looked through her like she didn't exist. Yes. I knew you just needed to get back out there. Forget about Mr. Impossible and focus on Mr. Right now. Mr. Impossible. That's what Andrea had started calling Maxwell 6 months ago, after one too many conversations about meaningful glances and almost moments that never led anywhere. The nickname had stung then because it felt dismissive of something Jasmine held sacred. Now it felt prophetic. Around 3 o'clock, Maxwell's door opened and he stepped out, heading toward the elevator without a word to anyone. Jasmine watched him go, noting the rigid set of his shoulders, the way his hands were clenched into fists at his sides. Everything about his posture screamed tension, barely controlled emotion. Where are you going? She wanted to ask. What happened to change everything between us? Why won't you even look at me? But she said nothing, did nothing. Just watched the elevator doors close on the man who held her heart in his hands without even knowing it. The afternoon crawled by with painful slowness. Maxwell returned around 5, his expression even more shuttered than before. He'd loosened his tie and his hair was disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it. When he passed her desk, Jasmine caught a whiff of alcohol, not enough to be obvious, but enough to worry her. The Patterson contracts are on your desk, she called after him, needing some excuse to break the silence. They need your signature before tomorrow's deadline. Maxwell paused in his doorway, his back still turned to her. For a moment, Jasmine thought he might actually respond, might give her some clue about what had changed between them. Instead, he disappeared into his office and closed the door. At 6 o'clock, when the rest of the floor had emptied out, Jasmine finally worked up the courage to knock on Maxwell's door. She'd rehearsed what she would say: professional, concerned, appropriate. She would ask if everything was all right, if there was anything she could do to help with whatever was troubling him. "Come in." His voice was rough, exhausted. Maxwell sat slumped in his chair, tie completely undone, jacket discarded somewhere. The Patterson contracts lay unsigned on his desk, and he was staring out at the city lights with an expression of such profound sadness that Jasmine's heart clenched. "I'm heading out," she said softly. "The contracts can wait until tomorrow if you prefer." "Fine." He didn't turn around. Jasmine lingered in the doorway, studying his profile in the glow of the city lights. The strong jaw, the aristocratic nose, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead when he wasn't being careful about his appearance. Even exhausted and clearly in pain, he was the most beautiful man she'd ever seen. "Maxwell," she whispered, forgetting protocol, forgetting boundaries, forgetting everything except the need to reach him somehow. "What's wrong?" Finally, he turned to look at her. The devastation in his eyes hit her like a physical blow. Raw grief mixed with something that looked almost like betrayal. For a heartbeat, she saw straight through to his soul, saw pain so deep it took her breath away. Then the mask slammed back into place. "Nothing that concerns you, Ms. Brooks. Go home. Enjoy your evening." The words were a dismissal and a dagger all at once. Jasmine stood there for another moment, memorizing the sight of him silhouetted against the glittering city, before she finally turned and walked away. Neither of them realized that their careful resistance was only making the inevitable collision more devastating. Some truths are just too powerful to be buried forever. The emergency call came at 6:47 p.m., just as Jasmine was packing up her desk for another day of Maxwell's Arctic treatment. The voice on the other end belonged to Gerald Hoffman, CEO of Hoffman Industries and Sterling Technologies' biggest potential client. A man whose acquisition deal could single-handedly reshape the tech industry. "Ms. Brooks, I need Maxwell immediately," Gerald's gravelly voice crackled through her headset. "There's been a development with the Beijing investors. They're pulling out unless we can provide revised projections by midnight tonight. If we lose this window, the entire deal collapses." Jasmine's stomach dropped. The Hoffman acquisition had been Maxwell's pet project for 8 months. A $2 billion merger that would cement Sterling Technologies as the dominant force in artificial intelligence development. She'd watched him pour his heart and soul into every detail, staying up until dawn refining proposals, flying to 3 different countries to court investors. "I'll get him immediately, Mr. Hoffman." She hung up and practically ran to Maxwell's office, not bothering to knock. He was exactly where she'd left him an hour ago, slumped in his chair, staring at nothing, looking like a man who'd lost everything that mattered. "Maxwell, Gerald Hoffman is on line 1. Emergency with the Beijing investors. They're threatening to pull out." For the first time in 2 days, Maxwell's eyes focused with laser intensity. The businessman in him snapped to attention, pushing aside whatever personal demons had been haunting him. "Get him on speaker and pull up the Beijing files. We'll need the Q4 projections and the market analysis reports from last month." Jasmine's fingers flew across her tablet, relief flooding through her as Maxwell's voice regained its familiar authority. This was the man she knew, decisive, brilliant, unstoppable when it came to business. The next 3 hours blurred together in a frenzy of phone calls, file transfers, and frantic calculations. Gerald connected them with the Beijing investors via video conference, their faces stern and unforgiving on the wall-mounted screen. Through rapid-fire Mandarin translated by their interpreter, they laid out their demands: revised profit projections showing sustainable growth in the Asian market, detailed breakdowns of manufacturing costs, and ironclad guarantees about intellectual property protection. "They want numbers that don't exist," Maxwell muttered, running his hands through his hair as the conference call ended. "We're supposed to project 5-year growth in markets that didn't exist 2 years ago." Jasmine was already pulling up files on her laptop, fingers dancing across the keyboard. "What if we use the Singapore expansion as a baseline? Similar economic factors, comparable consumer demographics. We could extrapolate from the first quarter numbers and adjust for currency fluctuations." Maxwell looked at her sharply, his business mind engaging despite the personal turmoil between them. "Show me." For the next hour, they worked side by side like they had hundreds of times before. Jasmine's quick mind caught patterns Maxwell missed, while his strategic vision turned her observations into compelling projections. The familiar rhythm of their collaboration gradually thawed the ice that had formed between them. "There," Jasmine said finally, hitting send on an email containing 27 pages of revised proposals. Delivered with 43 minutes to spare. Maxwell leaned back in his chair, exhaustion replacing the adrenaline that had carried him through the evening. For the first time since Tuesday morning, he looked directly at her. Really looked, and Jasmine saw the man she'd fallen in love with underneath the professional facade. "You saved the deal," he said quietly. "Gerald was right to call you instead of trying to reach me directly. I've been—" He trailed off, something vulnerable flickering in his gray eyes. "Distracted," Jasmine finished diplomatically, though her heart was racing at the way he was looking at her. That's one word for it. The building around them had fallen silent hours ago. Outside the windows, Manhattan glittered like scattered diamonds, but inside Maxwell's office, the world had shrunk to just the two of them and the electric tension that always sparked when they were alone together. "We should probably head home," Jasmine said, though she made no move to leave. "It's almost 10. Probably." Maxwell's voice was rough, tired. "Jasmine." Her name on his lips sent shivers down her spine. Not Ms. Brooks, not the formal distance he'd maintained for 2 days, but her actual name spoken like a prayer. "Yes." He opened his mouth, then closed it, whatever words he'd been about to say dying unspoken. The moment stretched between them, fragile and loaded with 3 years of unresolved tension. "Nothing. You're right. We should go home." But neither of them moved. Jasmine found herself studying the way the desk lamp cast shadows across Maxwell's face, highlighting the strong line of his jaw, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead when he forgot to keep it perfectly styled. She wanted to reach out and smooth it back, wanted to ask him why he'd been treating her like a stranger, wanted to confess that she'd been thinking about him even while kissing another man. "Maxwell," she said softly, taking a step closer to his desk. "These past 2 days, did I do something wrong? Because if I crossed a line somehow—" "You didn't." The words came out sharper than he'd intended, and she saw him force himself to soften his tone. "You haven't done anything wrong, Jasmine. It's not about you." "Then what is it about?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither was ready to voice. Maxwell's hands gripped the arms of his chair, knuckles white with tension, and Jasmine could see him waging some internal war. "It's complicated," he said finally. "Try me." She moved closer, coming around the side of his desk until she was standing just a few feet away from him. "We've worked together for 3 years, Maxwell. I've seen you handle hostile takeovers and congressional hearings without breaking a sweat. What could possibly be so complicated that you can't talk to me about it?" "Everything," Maxwell thought desperately. "You're what's complicated. The way you make me feel, the way I can't stop thinking about you, the way watching you kiss another man nearly destroyed me." But he couldn't say any of that. Couldn't cross that line and risk losing her entirely. "Personal matters," he said instead, hating how inadequate the word sounded. Jasmine's expression shifted, something hurt and disappointed flickering across her features. "Right. Personal matters that are none of my business." "That's not what I meant." "Isn't it?" She straightened, professional mask sliding back into place even as her voice carried an edge of pain. "Because for a while there, I thought we were friends. I thought maybe we'd built something more than just a working relationship. But I guess I was wrong about that too. The words hit Maxwell like physical blows. She was right. They had built something more. Over 3 years of shared coffee and late-night conversations, of stolen glances and moments of perfect understanding, they'd created something precious and fragile. And he was destroying it because he was too much of a coward to fight for what he wanted. Jasmine, please. It's not that simple. Everything's simple to you, Maxwell. Business deals worth billions, market strategies that reshape entire industries. You make it all look effortless. But somehow, basic human communication is too complicated. She was angry now, her brown eyes flashing with fire, and Maxwell realized this was the first real emotion she'd shown him since Tuesday morning. Even her anger was better than the careful professionalism she'd been hiding behind. You want to know what's complicated? The words were out before he could stop them. 3 days of suppressed emotion finally boiling over. Watching someone you care about move on with their life while you stand on the sidelines like an idiot, too afraid to. He caught himself just in time, but the damage was done. Jasmine's eyes widened, her anger transforming into something else entirely. Confusion, hope, a dawning understanding that made Maxwell's chest tighten with panic. Too afraid to what, Maxwell? The question was barely a whisper, but it echoed in the silence between them like a gunshot. Maxwell stared at her, at the woman who'd become his entire world without him even realizing it, and felt the last of his control slipping away. What happens when 3 years of carefully maintained boundaries finally crack? Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever been afraid to tell someone how you really feel? Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that will make your heart race. The silence stretched between them like a chasm, Maxwell's unfinished confession hanging in the air like smoke. Jasmine's heart hammered against her ribs as she searched his face, looking for answers to questions she'd been afraid to ask for 3 years. Too afraid to what? She repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Maxwell stood abruptly, turning toward the windows as if the glittering city could provide the courage he'd been lacking. His reflection stared back at him, a powerful man reduced to a coward by his own heart. Forget I said anything, he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. No. Jasmine's response was firm, surprising them both. I'm tired of pretending, Maxwell. Tired of walking on eggshells around whatever this is between us. You want to know what's complicated? It's spending 3 years wondering if I'm losing my mind, if I'm imagining the way you look at me sometimes, if you're not imagining it. The words escaped before Maxwell could stop them, raw and honest and devastating in their simplicity. He turned back to face her, and Jasmine saw something break open in his expression. Years of careful control finally crumbling. You're not imagining any of it, he continued, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. God help me, you're not imagining it. Jasmine's breath caught. Maxwell. Do you want to know when it started? He laughed, but there was no humor in it, only pain and self-recrimination. Really want to know when I became the pathetic fool who's been in love with his assistant for 3 years. The word love hit Jasmine like lightning, sending shockwaves through her entire body. She gripped the edge of his desk for support, afraid her knees might give out. Maxwell didn't seem to notice her reaction. He was lost in memory now, his eyes distant and vulnerable. It was your 2nd week here. September 15th, 2021. The board meeting from hell. Remember? Henderson Industries was trying to force a hostile takeover, and I'd been awake for 36 hours straight trying to find a legal way to block them. Jasmine remembered. Maxwell had looked terrible that day. Exhausted, desperate, like a man watching his life's work slip through his fingers. She'd been the new girl, barely qualified to fetch coffee, but she'd stayed late to help organize files anyway. I was in that conference room, surrounded by lawyers and executives, all of them telling me different versions of "you're screwed." And then you walked in with those financial reports I'd asked for. Maxwell's voice grew softer, more wonder than pain now. But you didn't just hand them over. You looked at the Henderson offer spread across the table, and you said, Why don't you acquire them instead? Jasmine finished, the memory crystal clear now. Everyone thought I was crazy. Everyone except me. Maxwell's smile was sad and beautiful. You saw what they were really after. Not our company, but our AI patents. And you realized that if we could get control of their manufacturing infrastructure first, we'd have everything we needed to dominate the market. It was just an observation, Jasmine said weakly, though her heart was soaring at the reverence in his voice. It was brilliant. It was the move that saved Sterling Technologies and made us the industry leader we are today. But that's not when I fell in love with you. Maxwell moved closer, his gray eyes locked on hers with an intensity that made her feel exposed and cherished all at once. It was what happened after. Everyone else was celebrating, slapping me on the back, talking about how brilliant I was for thinking of the counter-acquisition. But you... He paused, his throat working as he swallowed hard. You stayed behind to help clean up the conference room. And when it was just us, you looked at me and said, "Are you okay? You look like you haven't slept in days." Jasmine's eyes filled with tears she didn't know she'd been holding back. You looked so tired. No one else even noticed. They saw the victory, the successful businessman, the guy who just pulled off a miracle. But you saw me, the real me, underneath all the armor and expectations. You saw that I was exhausted and scared and human. Maxwell's hand moved as if to touch her face, then dropped to his side. That's when I knew I was in trouble. When I realized that all the money and power in the world meant nothing if I couldn't share it with someone who actually saw me. Maxwell, Jasmine whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks now. Why didn't you ever say anything? His laugh was bitter. Say what? That I was in love with my employee? That I'd been fantasizing about a life with someone so far out of my league it wasn't even funny. Out of your league? Jasmine's voice cracked with disbelief. You're Maxwell Sterling. You're brilliant and successful and 42 years old with a history of failed relationships because I'm apparently incapable of connecting with people on anything deeper than a business level, Maxwell interrupted. Do you know how many women have told me I'm emotionally unavailable? That I care more about my company than I could ever care about another human being. He turned away again, shame radiating from every line of his body. They weren't wrong. Before you, I'd never met anyone who made me want to be better, who made me believe I could be better. And the one person who did that for me was someone I had no right to pursue. No right. Jasmine stepped closer, her voice gaining strength. Who decided that? Reality. Society. The fact that I'm your boss and you depend on me for your livelihood. The fact that I'm rich and powerful and you could never know for sure if your feelings were real or just influenced by the situation. Maxwell's voice broke on the last words, and Jasmine finally understood the depth of his torment. He hadn't just been afraid of rejection. He'd been afraid of corrupting what they had, of making her feel pressured or obligated. You idiot, she said softly, and Maxwell's head snapped up in surprise. Excuse me. You beautiful, brilliant, absolutely infuriating idiot. Jasmine was crying and laughing at the same time now, 3 years of suppressed emotion finally breaking free. Do you have any idea how many nights I've lain awake wondering the exact same things? Wondering if I was imagining the connection between us? Wondering if you could ever see me as anything more than just your assistant? Maxwell stared at her as if she'd just performed a miracle. Jasmine! Do you want to know when I fell in love with you? She continued, the words tumbling out like water through a broken dam. Christmas Eve, 2022. Remember, everyone else had gone home for the holidays, but we stayed late to finish the Morrison presentation. You said you didn't have anywhere else to be, Maxwell remembered, his voice barely audible. I lied. Andrea was having a party. My family was expecting me for dinner. But I stayed because you looked so alone, and I couldn't bear the thought of you spending Christmas Eve by yourself in this building. Maxwell's eyes were shining now, hope and disbelief warring in his expression. "We ordered Chinese food and worked until midnight," Jasmine continued. "And when we finally finished, you walked me to the elevator and said, 'Thank you for staying. This was the best Christmas Eve I've had in years.' And you smiled, really smiled, not the polite business smile but something real and warm and meant just for me." "I meant it," Maxwell said hoarsely. "It was the best Christmas Eve I'd had in years. That's when I knew I was completely, hopelessly in love with you. And that's when I knew I was in trouble, because you were Maxwell Sterling and I was just—" "Don't!" Maxwell's voice was fierce. "Don't you dare say just anything. You're the smartest, most compassionate, most beautiful woman I've ever known. You're the light in my life, Jasmine. You're the reason I started believing I might actually deserve happiness." They were standing close now, close enough that Jasmine could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes, could feel the warmth radiating from his body. 3 years of longing and fear and desperate love hung in the air between them like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. "So what happens now?" Jasmine asked, her voice trembling with possibility. Maxwell's hand finally moved to cup her face, his thumb wiping away the tears on her cheek with infinite gentleness. "Now we figure out if two people who've been in love for 3 years can find the courage to actually do something about it." But just as they were finally ready to take that leap of faith, the sound of footsteps in the hallway reminded them that some confessions come at the worst possible times. The footsteps in the hallway belonged to Frank, the night security guard, making his rounds. Maxwell and Jasmine froze at the sound, the spell of their confessions momentarily broken by the reminder that they were still in his office, still technically boss and employee, still standing on the precipice of crossing every professional boundary they'd maintained for 3 years. "We should probably," Jasmine started, but Maxwell's thumb traced across her cheek again, and the words died in her throat. "Should probably what?" he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "Go back to pretending? Spend another 3 years dancing around this?" The footsteps faded as Frank continued down the corridor, leaving them alone again in their bubble of revealed truth. Jasmine looked up into Maxwell's eyes and saw her own desperation reflected there, the bone-deep exhaustion of loving someone in silence, of stealing moments and living on crumbs of affection. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted, her voice small. "I don't know how to be anything other than your assistant." Maxwell's other hand came up to frame her face completely, his touch gentle and reverent. "Neither do I. I've never mixed business with—" He paused, then laughed softly. "Hell, I've never felt anything like this, period. You think I have some master plan here?" Despite everything, Jasmine found herself smiling. The great Maxwell Sterling, master of billion-dollar acquisitions, stumped by basic human emotion? "Completely and utterly stumped," he confirmed, his own smile breaking through the intensity. "You've rendered me useless, Jasmine Brooks. I've been walking around for 3 years like a lovesick teenager, composing speeches I'll never give and imagining conversations we'll never have." "What kind of conversations?" The question slipped out before Jasmine could stop it, curiosity overriding caution. Maxwell's eyes grew distant, vulnerable. "Conversations where I tell you that your laugh is the best part of my day. Where I ask what you're thinking when you get that little wrinkle between your eyebrows while you're concentrating. Where I admit that I've rearranged my entire schedule around your coffee runs because 5 minutes of your undivided attention is worth more to me than any business meeting." Each confession hit Jasmine like a physical touch, warmth spreading through her chest. "Maxwell. Conversations where I tell you that you're beautiful," he continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Not just physically, though God knows you take my breath away every time you walk into a room. But beautiful in the way you remember everyone's birthday, the way you always know exactly what to say to defuse tension in a meeting, the way you laugh at my terrible jokes even when they're not funny." "They are funny," Jasmine protested weakly, though she was crying again. Happy tears this time, overwhelmed by the poetry of his suppressed feelings. "They're awful, and you know it." Maxwell's thumb caught another tear as it fell. But you laugh anyway, and it makes me feel like maybe I'm not as hopeless as I thought. The tenderness in his voice, in his touch, was almost too much to bear. Jasmine had dreamed of this moment, of Maxwell finally seeing her, finally acknowledging what had been building between them, but the reality was more overwhelming than any fantasy. "I used to imagine what it would be like," she whispered, "to have you look at me the way you're looking at me now. Like I'm precious. Like I matter. You do matter." Maxwell's voice was fierce with conviction. "You matter more than anything. Do you have any idea what it's been like, watching you from across the office every day, knowing I could never tell you how I feel? Knowing that some other man would eventually realize what I was too afraid to claim." The mention of another man brought reality crashing back. Jasmine's stomach clenched as she remembered Marcus, remembered the kiss that had felt like betrayal even though she'd had no commitment to betray. "About Tuesday night," she began, but Maxwell shook his head. "You don't owe me any explanations. You were free to date whoever you wanted. I had no claim on you." "But you saw us," Jasmine said, understanding flooding through her. "That's why you've been so cold. You saw me with Marcus." Maxwell's hands dropped from her face, and he stepped back, the vulnerable moment fracturing. "I was driving home. I saw you outside tavern on the green with him." The last word came out rough, laden with pain. "I watched you kiss him, and I realized what a fool I'd been. Maxwell. I realized that while I'd been playing it safe, building castles in the air and convincing myself that someday I'd find the courage to tell you how I felt, you'd been living your life, moving on. And I had no right to be hurt by that, because I'd never given you any reason to wait for me." Jasmine's heart broke at the self-recrimination in his voice. "You think I was moving on? Weren't you?" Maxwell's eyes were bleak. He seemed like a good man. Successful. Attractive. Available. Everything I should have been but was too much of a coward to become. "He is all those things," Jasmine admitted, and watched Maxwell flinch. "He's perfect on paper. Charming. Intelligent. Genuinely nice. The kind of man any woman would be lucky to have. Then why do you sound so miserable about it?" Jasmine laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Because the entire time he was kissing me, all I could think about was you. Because when he told me I was beautiful, I wondered what it would sound like in your voice. Because I felt like I was cheating on someone I wasn't even dating." Maxwell stared at her, hope and disbelief warring in his expression. "Jasmine." "I went out with him because Andrea convinced me I needed to move on from my impossible crush. Because I was tired of loving someone who could never love me back." She stepped closer to him again, her voice growing stronger. "Turns out I was wrong about the impossible part." "You weren't wrong about me being a coward," Maxwell said bitterly. "If I'd had any backbone at all, I would have told you how I felt years ago. I would have fought for you instead of watching from the sidelines like." Jasmine silenced him by placing her finger against his lips, the contact sending electricity shooting through both of them. "Stop," she said firmly. "Stop beating yourself up for being careful. Do you know how many workplace relationships end in disaster? How many women have told stories about bosses who abused their power, who made their employees feel trapped or obligated?" Maxwell's eyes softened with understanding. "You were protecting me," Jasmine continued. "Protecting us. Making sure that if something ever happened between us, it would be real and honest and chosen freely. That's not cowardice, Maxwell. That's integrity." "But I almost lost you," he whispered. "If you'd fallen in love with him." "I couldn't fall in love with him," Jasmine interrupted. "My heart was already taken." The simple declaration hung between them, profound in its honesty. Maxwell closed his eyes, overwhelmed by the weight of everything they'd revealed, everything they'd almost lost. "What happens now?" he asked, echoing her earlier question. "How do we do this without destroying everything we've built?" Jasmine considered the question seriously. Their professional relationship was too valuable to sacrifice carelessly, but the personal connection they'd revealed was too powerful to ignore. "Carefully," she said finally. "Slowly. We figure it out as we go. Together. Together." Maxwell opened his eyes, and for the first time in 3 years, Jasmine saw him completely unguarded, vulnerable and hopeful and absolutely beautiful in his honesty. "I love you," he said simply, as if testing how the words felt in the open air between them. "I've loved you for so long that I can't remember what it felt like before." "I love you too," Jasmine replied, and watched wonder bloom across his features as if he still couldn't quite believe it was real. They stood there in the soft glow of his office lights, the Manhattan skyline twinkling beyond the windows. 3 years of silence finally broken. Neither moved to kiss or embrace. This moment was too sacred to rush, too precious to risk shattering with haste. For now, it was enough to stand in the truth of their feelings, to let the words they'd been afraid to speak settle into the space between them like a foundation for whatever came next. The morning after their confessions should have felt like a new beginning. Instead, Jasmine woke up to 17 missed calls from Marcus and a text that made her stomach plummet. Saw the news about Sterling Tech's late-night heroics saving the Hoffman deal. "You and your boss make quite the team. Coffee later to celebrate?" She stared at the message, guilt twisting in her chest like a knife. In the euphoria of finally revealing their feelings, she'd completely forgotten about Marcus. Kind, patient Marcus who thought they were building something real together. "I can't keep doing this," she thought, sitting on the edge of her bed in her small Brooklyn apartment. "I can't keep stringing him along when my heart belongs to someone else." An hour later, she stood outside Sterling Technologies, steeling herself for what promised to be the most complicated day of her professional life. How do you navigate a normal workday after confessing love to your boss? How do you maintain professional boundaries when every carefully constructed wall between you has crumbled? The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt eternal. When the doors opened, Jasmine saw Maxwell already at his desk through the glass walls of his office, looking immaculate as always in a navy suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. For a moment, their eyes met across the space, and she saw the same uncertainty she felt reflected in his gray gaze. "What are we doing?" his expression seemed to ask. "I have no idea," hers replied. Their morning routine felt surreal. Coffee delivered with trembling hands, the usual pleasantries exchanged while both hyper-aware of every word, every glance, every accidental touch. To anyone watching, they appeared perfectly normal. Inside, Jasmine felt like she was walking a tightrope over an abyss. "The Hoffman contracts came through," Maxwell said as she set his coffee down, his voice carefully professional. "Gerald called this morning. The Beijing investors are satisfied with our projections." "That's wonderful," Jasmine replied, trying to match his tone while her heart raced at his proximity. "I knew you'd find a way to make it work." "We found a way," Maxwell corrected, and something warm flickered in his eyes before he caught himself. "I couldn't have done it without your insights." The moment stretched between them, loaded with double meanings and unspoken emotions, until Maxwell's phone rang and shattered the spell. The morning progressed in a series of near misses and careful distances. Maxwell attended 3 meetings while Jasmine fielded calls and organized his calendar, both hyper-aware of the other's presence. Every time their hands accidentally brushed, passing documents, reaching for the same file, electricity sparked between them. It was dangerous, intoxicating, and completely unsustainable. At noon, Jasmine's phone buzzed with another text from Marcus. "Still haven't heard back. Everything okay? Really looking forward to seeing you tonight." Tonight. She'd forgotten they had dinner plans. Her stomach churned as she realized she'd have to face Marcus knowing everything had changed, knowing she'd been emotionally unfaithful even before she and Maxwell had spoken their truth. She was staring at her phone, paralyzed by guilt and indecision, when a shadow fell across her desk. "Problem." Maxwell's voice was low, concerned, intimate in a way that made her look up sharply. "It's nothing," she said quickly, but not quickly enough. Maxwell's eyes had already caught the name on her screen. Marcus Wright. The man who'd kissed her 3 nights ago. The man who thought he was dating her. Something cold and sharp passed across Maxwell's features before he could control it. Your dinner date? The words were casual, but Jasmine heard the tension underneath. Maxwell. It's fine, he said, stepping back from her desk. None of my business. But it wasn't fine. Jasmine could see it in the rigid set of his shoulders, the way his jaw clenched, the careful distance he put between them. The fragile trust they'd built the night before was already showing cracks. We need to talk, she said quietly. No, we don't. Maxwell's voice was clipped, professional. You have every right to honor your prior commitments. Last night doesn't change your obligations. The formal language felt like a slap. After hours of intimate confessions, he was retreating behind business speak and emotional walls. It changes everything, Jasmine said, standing up and moving closer despite the warning signs screaming in her head. You know it does. Does it? Maxwell's smile was bitter. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're keeping your options open. Smart, really. Hedge your bets in case the billionaire boss turns out to be as emotionally unavailable as advertised. The accusation hit Jasmine like a physical blow. How can you say that? After everything we shared last night. Last night was a moment of weakness, Maxwell interrupted, his voice growing colder. For both of us. Maybe it's better if we pretend it never happened. You don't mean that. Don't I? Maxwell's eyes were arctic now, all trace of vulnerability erased. Face it, Jasmine. We got caught up in the drama of the moment. High emotions, late night, successful deal. It's textbook, really. But in the cold light of day, we both know this is impossible. Each word was a dagger, deliberately chosen to wound. Jasmine felt tears burning behind her eyes but refused to let them fall. Not here. Not where anyone could see. So that's it, she asked, her voice barely steady. You're just going to pretend you never said you loved me? Love. Maxwell laughed, and the sound was ugly, nothing like the warm laughter she'd fallen in love with. I said a lot of things last night. Doesn't mean they were true. The lie was so blatant, so obviously motivated by fear and self-protection, that it should have been easy to dismiss. But combined with Maxwell's cruel tone and the wall he'd thrown up between them, it landed with devastating accuracy. I see, Jasmine said quietly, pride finally coming to her rescue. Well, thank you for clarifying. I won't make the mistake of reading too much into professional courtesy again. She turned to go back to her desk, but Maxwell's voice stopped her. Jasmine, wait. It's Ms. Brooks, she said without turning around. I think we should maintain appropriate professional boundaries from now on, don't you, Mr. Sterling? The formal address hit Maxwell like a punch to the gut. He watched her return to her desk, her spine straight and proud, and knew he'd just destroyed the best thing in his life out of pure, cowardly panic. What the hell is wrong with you? His conscience screamed. She was going to break up with him for you, and you threw it back in her face because you're terrified of being vulnerable. But it was too late. The damage was done. Jasmine's walls were back up, her professional mask firmly in place, and the woman who'd whispered, I love you, in the soft glow of his office lights was gone, replaced by the efficient assistant who'd never again let him close enough to hurt her. The afternoon passed in excruciating tension. Maxwell buried himself in work, trying to drown out the voice in his head that called him every variation of fool and coward. Jasmine maintained perfect professionalism, her interactions with him courteous but cold, as if the previous night had never happened. At 5 o'clock, she appeared in his doorway with her purse and coat, looking beautiful and untouchable in a way that made Maxwell's chest ache. I'm leaving for the day, she announced. The Morrison files are on your desk, and I've rescheduled your Monday morning meeting with Patterson Industries. Jasmine! Is there anything else you need, Mr. Sterling? The formal address was like salt in an open wound. Maxwell looked at her, really looked, and saw the hurt she was trying so hard to hide behind professional composure. "No," he said quietly. "Have a good evening." "Thank you. Enjoy your weekend." She turned to leave, then paused without looking back. "For what it's worth," she said softly, "I was going to tell him tonight. I was going to end things with Marcus because what we shared last night meant everything to me. But I guess you saved me the trouble of making a fool of myself." Maxwell watched her walk away, each step taking her further from the possibility they'd almost grasped. By the time he found his voice to call her back, the elevator doors had closed and she was gone. He'd just learned the cruelest lesson of all. Sometimes the biggest risk isn't taking a chance on love, it's pushing it away when it finally finds you. The silence in Maxwell's penthouse was deafening. He stood at his massive windows, the same ones that had witnessed his breakdown 3 nights ago, watching the city lights blur through the bottom of his third glass of whiskey. The amber liquid did nothing to numb the self-loathing that consumed him, nothing to quiet the voice in his head that repeated her last words like a mantra of his own stupidity. "I was going to tell him tonight. I was going to end things with Marcus because what we shared last night meant everything to me." Maxwell closed his eyes, but behind his lids he saw Jasmine's face as he destroyed her. The way her eyes had filled with hurt before pride took over, the careful control in her voice as she'd rebuilt every wall he'd spent 3 years trying to scale. "What we shared last night meant everything to me." Past tense. Because he'd taken something beautiful and sacred and crushed it with his bare hands the moment reality intruded. The moment his fear had overcome his courage. His phone sat silent on the coffee table, Marcus Wright's name glowing in the contact list that Maxwell had memorized during his descent into jealous madness. One call. One conversation. That's all it would take to know for certain whether Jasmine had followed through with her plan, whether she'd chosen love over safety, whether he'd lost her forever to his own cowardice. She said she was going to end it, he told himself for the 100th time since she'd left. But that was before you called last night a lie. Before you told her none of it was real. The rational part of his mind knew exactly what he'd done, lashed out like a wounded animal when faced with the possibility of vulnerability. The same pattern that had destroyed every relationship he'd ever attempted, the same fear-based cruelty that had kept him safe and alone for 42 years. But this wasn't just any relationship. This was Jasmine. Maxwell's reflection stared back at him from the window, and he saw his father's face looking back. The same cold eyes, the same emotional distance that had made his childhood a wasteland of unspoken feelings and conditional love. Robert Sterling had built an empire by never showing weakness, never admitting need, never allowing anyone close enough to hurt him. He'd also died alone, surrounded by employees and business partners, but no one who actually loved him. "Is that what you want?" Maxwell asked his reflection. "To become him? To push away the only person who's ever seen the real you because you're too afraid to be human?" The apartment felt like a mausoleum around him, filled with expensive furniture and priceless art but devoid of life, of warmth, of anything that mattered. For 3 years, Jasmine had been the light that made this place bearable. Her laugh echoing in his memory during lonely evenings, her concern for his well-being the closest thing to home he'd ever known. And he'd thrown it all away because the alternative, actually fighting for love, terrified him more than any hostile takeover or congressional hearing ever could. Maxwell's phone buzzed with a text from his driver. "Sir, will you be needing the car this evening?" This evening. Maxwell checked the time. 8:47 p.m. Jasmine's dinner with Marcus would be happening right now. Was she telling him about Maxwell? Was she ending things as she'd planned? Or had Maxwell's cruelty driven her straight into another man's arms? The not knowing was killing him. 15 blocks away, Jasmine sat across from Marcus at a cozy Italian restaurant in Soho, mechanically twirling pasta around her fork while he told an animated story about his latest court case. She'd been there for 90 minutes, and every second felt like an eternity. "You're quiet tonight," Marcus observed, reaching across the table to cover her hand with his. "Everything okay?" No, she wanted to scream. "Everything is not okay. I'm in love with someone else, someone who told me he loved me and then took it back like it was all a joke." Someone who looked me in the eye and called my feelings a moment of weakness. Just tired, she said instead, forcing a smile that felt like broken glass. Long week at work. That boss of yours really works you hard, doesn't he? Marcus's expression was sympathetic, concerned. Maybe it's time to start looking for something better. You're too talented to be someone's assistant forever. The innocent comment hit Jasmine like a slap. Not because Marcus was wrong. She was overqualified for her position, could probably run her own company if she wanted to, but because he didn't understand. Being Maxwell's assistant had never been about the job title. It had been about being close to the man she loved, about building something meaningful together, even if it was disguised as professional collaboration. My work is important to me, she said quietly. Of course it is. I just think you deserve to be appreciated for your talents, not taken for granted. Taken for granted. The phrase echoed in Jasmine's mind as she looked at Marcus, really looked at him. He was everything she should want. Stable, kind, successful, emotionally available. He saw her worth, appreciated her intelligence, treated her like she was precious. So why did being with him feel like settling? Marcus, she began, her heart hammering against her ribs. I need to tell you something. Something in her tone made him straighten, his lawyer instincts picking up on the gravity of the moment. Okay. You're a wonderful man. Truly. Any woman would be lucky to have you in her life. Marcus's face fell as he recognized the beginning of a breakup speech. But I'm not available. Not emotionally. I thought I could move on from someone else. But I can't. It wouldn't be fair to you to keep pretending otherwise. To his credit, Marcus didn't argue or try to change her mind. He sat back in his chair, studying her face with the same intensity he probably brought to cross-examinations. This someone else, he said finally. Does he know how you feel? Jasmine's laugh was bitter. He knows. He just doesn't care. Then he's an idiot. The simple declaration brought tears to Jasmine's eyes. Thank you for saying that. I mean it. Marcus signaled for the check, his movements gentle despite the disappointment in his eyes. And Jasmine, when you're ready to try again, really ready, I hope you find someone who sees your worth and isn't afraid to fight for it. Maxwell paced his penthouse like a caged animal, his phone clutched in his white-knuckled grip. 11:23 p.m. Dinner would be over by now. The conversation would have happened, one way or another. 3 times he'd started to dial Jasmine's number. 3 times he'd stopped, paralyzed by the certainty that he'd already burned that bridge beyond repair. She told you she loved you, the voice in his head whispered. She was willing to give up her safety net for you, and you threw it back in her face. Why would she ever forgive that? But another voice, quieter but more persistent, kept speaking up. Because she loved you for 3 years before you gave her any reason to hope. Because she saw something in you worth fighting for even when you couldn't see it yourself. Because love doesn't die in one conversation, no matter how badly you screw it up. Maxwell found himself standing in front of the framed photo on his mantel, the only personal picture in his entire apartment. It was from the company Christmas party 2 years ago, a candid shot someone had taken without his knowledge. He was laughing at something Jasmine had whispered in his ear, his expression unguarded and genuinely happy in a way that no business success had ever achieved. Looking at that photo, Maxwell finally understood what he'd been fighting against. Not Jasmine's feelings, not the impropriety of an office romance, not even his fear of vulnerability. He'd been fighting against the possibility of being truly happy. For 42 years, he'd convinced himself that happiness was a luxury he couldn't afford, that emotional connection was a weakness that would compromise his effectiveness. But the man in that photo, laughing with the woman he loved, unguarded and alive in a way he'd never been before or since, that man wasn't weak. That man was everything Maxwell Sterling could be if he found the courage to try. The question is, Maxwell thought, staring at his reflection in the dark window, do you have the courage to fight for her? Or are you going to let fear win again? His phone felt heavy in his hand as he scrolled to Jasmine's contact. His finger hovered over the call button while his heart hammered against his ribs. One call, he told himself. One chance to tell her the truth. To admit you were wrong, that you were scared, that everything you said today was a lie born of panic. One chance to find out if love is stronger than fear. Maxwell closed his eyes, thought of Jasmine's smile, her laugh, the way she'd looked at him when she whispered, "I love you too." Then he pressed, call. What would you do if you had one chance to fix the biggest mistake of your life? Sometimes courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being scared and choosing love anyway. The phone rang 4 times before Jasmine's sleepy voice answered, rough with exhaustion and something that might have been tears. Maxwell. There was confusion in her voice, but also a note of hope that made his chest tighten. It's 2 in the morning. What's wrong? Everything, he said without preamble, his voice raw with emotion. Everything is wrong, and it's all my fault. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the sound of Jasmine shifting in what he assumed was her bed. Maxwell could picture her there, hair mussed from sleep, those beautiful brown eyes wide with surprise, probably wearing one of the oversized t-shirts she'd mentioned during their late-night conversations. Maxwell, if this is about work. It's not about work. The words came out fierce, desperate. It's never been about work, and we both know it. Jasmine, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen because I may never get another chance to say this. Another pause, then. I'm listening. Maxwell closed his eyes, drawing strength from the knowledge that she was there, that she was giving him this moment despite everything he'd done to destroy it. I lied to you today. Every word I said in the office was a lie born of panic and fear and stupidity. Last night wasn't a moment of weakness. It was the most honest I've ever been in my life. When I told you I loved you, I meant it with every fiber of my being. Maxwell, please, let me finish. I've been practicing this speech for 3 hours, and if I stop now, I'll lose my nerve again. His voice cracked on the words, but he pushed forward. I was terrified, Jasmine. Not of loving you. I've been doing that for 3 years. I was terrified of what it would mean if you loved me back. Terrified that I would somehow corrupt what we had, that my feelings would make you feel obligated or trapped or... Stop. Jasmine's voice was firm but not unkind. Just stop for a second. Maxwell fell silent, his heart hammering as he waited for her to speak. Where are you? She asked. My apartment. Why? What's your address? Maxwell blinked, caught off guard by the unexpected question. Jasmine, it's 2 in the morning. What's your address, Maxwell? He gave it to her, confusion evident in his voice. Why do you? The line went dead. Maxwell stared at his phone, panic rising in his chest. Had she hung up on him? Had his confession been too little, too late? He tried calling back, but it went straight to voicemail. She's done with you, his fear whispered. You had your chance and you blew it. But something else, hope, maybe, or just desperate need, made him stay by the window, watching the street below like a man waiting for salvation. 37 minutes later, a yellow taxi pulled up to his building. Maxwell's breath caught as Jasmine emerged, still wearing the burgundy dress from her dinner with Marcus but with a denim jacket thrown over it. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and even from 42 floors up, he could see the determination in her posture as she paid the driver and headed for the building entrance. His doorman's voice crackled through the intercom 5 minutes later. Mr. Sterling? There's a Ms. Brooks here to see you. Send her up, Maxwell managed, his voice barely functional. The longest elevator ride in history ended with a soft knock on his door. Maxwell opened it to find Jasmine standing in his hallway, looking fierce and beautiful and absolutely furious. You, she said, pointing an accusatory finger at his chest, are an idiot. Yes, Maxwell agreed immediately. Yes, I am. The biggest idiot who ever lived. Do you have any idea what you put me through today? She pushed past him into his apartment, her heels clicking on the marble floor. Do you know how it felt to have you call everything we shared a lie? To have you dismiss 3 years of feelings like they were nothing? Jasmine, I'm sorry. I'm not finished. She spun to face him, eyes blazing. I broke up with Marcus tonight. I sat in that restaurant and told a perfectly wonderful man that I couldn't be with him because I was in love with someone else. Someone who had just told me our entire relationship was meaningless. Maxwell's heart stopped. You broke up with him? Of course I broke up with him. Jasmine threw her hands up in exasperation. Did you think one cruel conversation was going to erase 3 years of love? Did you think I could just turn off my feelings because you got scared? I thought. Maxwell stopped, realizing how pathetic his reasoning sounded. I thought you deserved better than a coward who runs at the first sign of real vulnerability. That's not your choice to make. Jasmine's voice rose, then cracked. You don't get to decide what I deserve, Maxwell. You don't get to make that choice for me. They stared at each other across his living room, 3 years of suppressed emotion finally boiling over. Jasmine's chest was heaving, her eyes bright with unshed tears, and Maxwell had never loved her more than he did in that moment, fierce and unafraid and absolutely magnificent in her anger. You're right, he said quietly. I don't get to make that choice. But Jasmine, I need you to understand. I've never been good at this. At letting people in, at being vulnerable. Every relationship I've ever had has ended the same way, with someone telling me I'm emotionally unavailable, that I care more about work than people. I'm not every other relationship, Jasmine said, her voice softening slightly. I'm me. I've known you for 3 years, Maxwell. I've seen you at your worst and your best, and I fell in love with all of it. The brilliant businessman and the man who stays late to make sure I get home safely. The billionaire and the person who remembers how I take my coffee. Maxwell took a step toward her, hope blooming in his chest like a physical ache. How do you take your coffee? What? Jasmine blinked, thrown by the non sequitur. Your coffee. How do you take it? Because in 3 years of bringing me coffee every morning, I've never once returned the favor. I know everything about your work preferences, your professional habits, your brilliant mind. But I don't know how you take your coffee, what your favorite color is, where you went to college, whether you're close with your family. Maxwell's voice grew rough with self-recrimination. I know I love you, but I don't know you. Not really. Not the way I should. If you are enjoying this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like the video and comment where you are watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories. And trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's continue. Jasmine's anger melted into something softer, more complex. Hazelnut creamer, no sugar, purple, Spelman College. And yes, I'm very close with my family. They live in Atlanta and my mother calls every Sunday to make sure I'm eating enough vegetables. Purple, Maxwell repeated, as if memorizing scripture. Spelman College. Sunday calls from your mother. My turn, Jasmine said, taking a step closer. How do you really take your coffee? Not the image you project, but what you actually prefer when no one's watching. Maxwell was quiet for a moment, then, with cream and 2 sugars. I've been drinking it black since I was 25 because it seemed more professional, more serious. What else? Jasmine's voice was gentle now, inviting. I hate sleeping in this apartment. It's too quiet, too empty. I stay late at the office partly because of work, but mostly because it feels less lonely there. With you. What else? I've never brought a woman here. You're the first person other than housekeeping staff to see where I live. Maxwell's voice dropped to a whisper. I think I was saving it, waiting for someone who mattered enough. Jasmine's breath caught. Maxwell. I love you, he said simply. Not because you're my assistant, not because you're convenient or safe or appropriate. I love you because you make me want to be better than I am. Because you see something in me that I've never been able to see in myself. Because when you smile at me, I remember what it feels like to be human. Tears were streaming down Jasmine's face now, but she was smiling too. I love you because you're already better than you think you are. Because you care so much about doing the right thing that you were willing to sacrifice your own happiness to protect mine. Because underneath all that armor, you have the biggest heart I've ever known. They were standing close now, close enough that Maxwell could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes, could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. So what happens now? He asked, echoing the question that had started this journey. Now, Jasmine said, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. We stop being afraid. We stop hiding behind professional boundaries and social expectations and all the reasons why this shouldn't work. We choose love, Maxwell. We choose each other. Even though I'm older than you, even though I'm your boss, even though everyone will have opinions about. Jasmine silenced him with a kiss. It was soft at first, tentative, as if they were both afraid this moment might shatter like all their other almosts. But then Maxwell's arms came around her waist, pulling her closer, and Jasmine melted into him with 3 years of suppressed longing. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Maxwell rested his forehead against hers. I'm going to mess this up, he whispered. I'm going to get scared and say the wrong thing and... Probably, Jasmine agreed, then smiled. And I'm going to be stubborn and overthink everything and drive you crazy with my need to fix problems that aren't mine to fix. I can't wait, Maxwell said, and meant it. We'll figure it out, Jasmine said, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. All of it. The work situation, the public scrutiny, how to navigate a relationship that started in the most unconventional way possible. We'll figure it out together. Together, Maxwell repeated, like a prayer. Together. Outside his windows, Manhattan was beginning to wake up. Early morning joggers in Central Park, delivery trucks rumbling through empty streets, the first hint of dawn painting the sky purple and gold. It was the start of a new day, a new chapter, a new possibility that had been 3 years in the making. Maxwell Sterling had built an empire by taking calculated risks, by seeing opportunities others missed and having the courage to act on them. But standing there with Jasmine in his arms, he realized that the biggest risk he'd ever taken wasn't a business deal or market venture. It was choosing to love someone enough to let them love him back. And as the sun rose over New York City, 2 hearts that had been dancing around each other for 3 years finally found their rhythm. Because sometimes the greatest victories aren't won in boardrooms or corner offices. They're won in the quiet moments when we choose vulnerability over safety, love over fear, and each other over everything else.